I don't think we have journalism school that will give you tourism as an elective. Because at the end of the day, media houses would rather cut the cost of training you a journalist that has zero information about tourism. Bagende n'abantu already abamanyi political science, baripotinge ku political stories.
Hey, welcome to Destination 256, your go-to destination for all things tourism in Uganda. I'm Zingozal, your host, and today, guess what? We have that one lady, Bamita Solid, solid conservation journalist. She has served this sector, she has been there, she knows at least, if I say at least, and if I may be quoted, everything about Destination Uganda when we are talking about the media way. And yes, Miss Olivia Nakalembe, you're most welcome.
Thank you so much, Zal. I don't even know how it struck you to have me on this particular platform, but guess what? Any platform is a platform. So I'm really pleased to be here.
It's nice having you here, really.
Thank you.
Having someone like you on our initial, one of our initial episodes. It's
why
it's
not?
a blessing. You've been
In
there.
this sector, women are underrepresented. So
Really?
Yes.
When
If you're thinking about, actually having women on the show that are making a commendable impact on Uganda's tourism industry that we understand right now, of course, ever since the COVID-19 pandemic broke that jinx, then it means we are on the right trajectory.
Hey, that statement changes. We had conversations with Jackie Kemirembe, and she listed, but you're doing a great job.
Thank you.
The ladies in this sector are really doing a great job, and that's why you're here.
Thank you so much.
We are there to give you this platform, talk about tourism in Uganda. And so, Olivia, you've been there. You've served in the journalism, department of Uganda's tourism sector, and yes, you've seen role. In your own way, describe that sector.
The sector.
Yes.
I think it's no-brainer right now that Uganda's tourism industry is largely nature-hinged. Because, for example, if you look at Uganda's water composition, about 25% of it is water, if I stand corrected. Then we go to forest cover, that, for example, in the 1990s was about 20%. Of course, I'm giving you now the extremes.
The extremes, yeah.
If we go to say wetland cover, we way up there still about 15%. If you look at basically the nature, However, what was this nature providing? It was providing a serene kind of environment. But if we are also to backtrack at the time when Churchill was here, they will tell you that wildlife was all over the place. That is where places like Kampala derive their names. The Seven Hills, because these were covered they were covered with impalas, and that is where Kampala derives its name. So you will see that we have, when we are to talk of nature, Uganda was really gifted back then.
First, wait. Kampala, Impala. It makes sense.
Yes, it does make sense.
It makes sense. So wow.
That is where our tourism journey begins. So Churchill comes here and he's so amazed and writes this book. However, we all know for sure that the book that he wrote sold Uganda outside there. The white man's life is really bent on reading. So every single person, that grabbed Churchill's book, first of all, he was from the royal family. Secondly, he had he had a very good political, and so politicians were well respected. Just like our president when he wrote the mustard seed. Right now, when you go to the Aristocrats of this world, you'll not find that book. It was already sold out. So, but given his political background, and the same thing happened to Churchill. When he wrote this book, everyone in the royal family got it. Historians, politicians got this book, and that statement that he wrote about the Pearl of Africa, when white people were still coming through to colonize, to divide and rule, when he said concentrate on the Pearl of Africa, that alone sold us out there. But also that is where he named us the Pearl of Africa. So, in a nutshell, media plays a central role. However, I don't know what happened between when Churchill wrote that book. Okay, let's give it like 10 years in, and then to now what we actually refer to as Uganda's media in terms of tourism. Because then it really bent on nature, but of course things have gone on evolving. But there's very few names we can attribute to covering tourism
in Uganda.
Environment conservation, wildlife conservation, vis-a-vis other sectors like politics.
I'm telling you.
I mean, you can name so many journalists in this country that have covered politics.
And the names are big.
But how many journalists can you mention?
They're on my fingertips.
So, for example, if we are to now get into the indigenous reporters, Uganda now comes back on the scene around the 1980s, when conservation journalists like Amoti Ndiakira, then who was writing for New Vision, came through and wrote a story about chimps.
Was that the times of the establishment of Ngamba also?
Yes, now Ngamba comes through as a product after this journalist, Amoti Ndiakira. So Amoti Ndiakira is, moving through Europe. He was a conservation journalist, environment journalist, moving through Europe. And then he sees chimpanzees. Now, after, probing a lot, he gets to understand that these chimpanzees that were placed in the circus, to entertain white people. When he, because journalism really is about research. You have to have your facts together. So he moves through Europe, finds these circuses where white people are being entertained by animals that are ferried from Africa. On probing more, he gets to understand that these chimpanzees were native to Uganda. So he pens this story
down.
But what sold that story so much is the pain that this chimpanzee went through. And when he pens this story, conservationists are, triggered. When they are triggered, the circus, kind of like gets into problems. Conservationists all over the place, even in Uganda, get so concerned. And of course, big names in the conservation industry, Jane Goodall, of course, those were also triggered because remember at that time, Jane Goodall had come to Uganda to get to study chimpanzees and man's evolution. So when they are triggered, this story gained so much international recognition, and they began the process of repatriating these chimpanzees back to Uganda. So when they get repatriated back to now, that particular chimpanzee was called or is called Sunday because he still lives. He still lives in Ngamba Island. When governments like that of Russia, gets involved, when that of Uganda gets involved, they, sit down and amicably resolve to make sure that they ferry this chimpanzee back where, because if you read through his life, he was being electrocuted. If they would tell him to do something and he doesn't do it, he would be electrocuted, he would be denied food, he was castrated. All these tests were being done because you also know, like when there's medicine that is being, tested, chimpanzees, because we have, I don't know, almost 90, a very thin line between our DNA and their DNA. So with all of this put into consideration, they really resolved that this chimpanzee has to go back home. And indeed, that gave birth to Ngamba Island, just like you have mentioned. And of course, the biggest name behind the establishment of Ngamba. But before he was taken to Ngamba Island, he was first returned to what was initially called the zoo, that we
zoo.
now refer to as UWEC.
UWEC,
Yes. So while the chimpanzees were there, Sunday and his other friends, but Sunday stood out for some reason because he was the most big-headed, chief. To the white man. So he's brought back to the zoo and then taken to Ngamba Island after it had been set up, after studies had been done, and that would be the appropriate place for them to be rehabilitated. And so with Amoti Ndiakira's story, our eyes now begin to open that we as indigenous journalists need to tailor our stories because no story had been written about the Pearl of Africa in that way. The beauty was out there, but the gaps the dents in our conservation industry had not been out there. So that's when wildlife, reporting comes into play. And so big thanks to such conservation journalists. But then we now go to the female side. I don't know how many names it is that you know in Uganda's conservation industry that are females. Not until now we get to maybe like Dr. Gladys. But remember, she was not even a journalist.
Yeah, she wasn't.
So she will only tailor a story from the vet point of view because that is her specialty. So you cannot blame her for that. In any case, it sold us when it comes to primates because we all know Uganda is the world's primate capital because we have the biggest percentage of primates in this country. So up until then, we really see our sector, the media sector, in terms of conservation and tourism, struggling. And so we needed to paint that background to show you that it's very difficult for you right now in Uganda. No, it was very difficult then for you in Uganda to write about tourism, Minance, having a conservation bit to it. However, with efforts by the Ministry of Tourism, the private sector, to product develop, we are now kind of, you can get a niche and say, for example, write about Uganda's cultural heritage.
And you be only there. And you're rich.
Exactly. So given that background, in terms of media coverage, we were not there then. But as time goes on, just like we've highlighted, we are trying to get there. But a lot needs to be done. A lot needs to be done, first of all, in terms of capacity building for the journalists.
Before even we get to the capacity development, are the media houses doing what they are supposed to do? Because it pains me for me to just sit on my, in my sitting room and I'm having a 20-second or 20 minutes show about tourism. I mean, Uganda has a lot.
And then when politics comes,
you have
they
3
capitalize
hours.
on one issue.
You understand?
Like
So I'm like, okay, are we okay to that extent of, portraying only the side of politics of Uganda and then we are leaving out, what we are supposed actually to give to people out there?
Okay. One thing you need to understand is that it does not only begin, it actually does not begin with the media houses because the media houses also pick it from somewhere. Let's go back to school where journalists, are trained. Before they actually get to be sucked up by any media house. I went to the Makerere School of Journalism. I pursued a bachelor's degree in journalism and communication. And guess what? I was a public relations major in my 4th year at Makerere University.
That's when you guys had to major in a specific field.
You do both journalism and communication. Then in your 4th year, you decide
what
do
you're
you
going
want to major in journalism, like active journalism, or you'd rather major in public relations. And for me, I felt like after having, experienced this, I remember the Media Challenge Initiative had also just been, set up at that time. I think in its 2nd year running, I won the 1 minute of fame. However, so many things for me triggered my mind. Now, the reason that's why I was saying it does not begin with the media houses, because we have to go back where journalism begins. It begins from the schools. In terms of practice, but in terms of like inspiration, it could begin from anywhere. Because for me now, to report about tourism, the inspiration minus the technicalities involved began from home because my mom was an animal lover. We had almost all the domestic animals at home. Turkeys, ducks, sheep, goat, cows, hens, what? We had everything. So my mom was an animal lover and should not stay in her home minus animals. Like, it was her peace of mind. If you walked in the sitting room, she would be watching Nat Geo. If you cross by, and you're blurring her view, ngoyinza okukijjamu enjawulo onviira, and when all these scenes of probably maybe like lions mating or lions like protecting their cubs or like lions hunting or monkeys playing jumping from tree to tree, like the expressions my mom would make like were so fascinating. She would be like, neba naye mulabe. So my mom is saying mulabe, but it's a monkey. Ngalinga agamba omuntu. Yet it's actually a watama. Neba naye mulabe. And she would call all of, but Olivia jangu katira bono mulabe mbagenze kuleetera abaana ab'emmere. So for me, the inspiration to cover tourism now began from home, but it still takes me back to capacity building, because now the technicalities of relaying this information to the public goes back to school. I went to the journalism school at Makerere. We have the must-dos and we have the electives. The electives are those subjects where you'd like choose. So there would be like 8, and you'd have to choose what it is that you want. But I will tell you for sure, in journalism school at Makerere, we do not have the elective of tourism.
But to do.
And I will tell you, in this country, I don't think we have journalism school that will give you tourism as an elective. But you know why we are big on politics? It's because political science is an elective that has been availed to journalists. So you will choose your area of specialty. Until you know what? Elective jengendo kola is political science. So from the get-go, you're studying political science. And when you go back to the journalism college or school or whatever it is, you incorporate what you have learned from the political science class into how you will report it. But tourism, is it there?
No.
It's not there. So that is where it all begins. But you would be asking yourself, how do I get to report to it? I'm now going to get to your point of you're disappointed in the media houses, not? So remember, after graduating from school, when you go to a media house, it is easy for you to pick up on the beat of politics because you have grounding in it. Togenda kudda ate ku ground zero tandike. But when you walk into a newsroom, how many editors there have grounding also in tourism? Abagenda okuguiding. In any case, they will be fighting you. I'll be giving you my own experience.
Exactly.
Malabudde. You understand that kind of thing? But when they say, Noop is going to do this. You understand? So I get into, when I graduated, I didn't immediately get into the newsroom because I love life. I love to party hard. I love to play hard, whereas I work hard. So I first get into the entertainment industry. But when all that is said and done, I now have to hop into the newsroom because mentally I'd grown. I remember I was working on a TV, on a youth show. I was working on NBS Youth Voice. And one time I asked a student a question, and my producers were like, Olivia, but then it kind of like happened for 3 times in a row, and I was like, I think mentally I've grown. I need to cross over.
I've outgrown this show.
I didn't want to put on suits. I didn't want to be serious. I didn't want coats. But then time had caught up with me. I was like, you know what? Let me just cross over to the newsroom. So I crossed over to the newsroom. I did my 6 months training. When I did my 6 months training, they're like, okay, now Olivia, what are you going to major in? Nengamba business. But I had no idea about what business was.
You had strong people in
or
business.
I didn't know that terms. It was a bit hard. However, you know, one of these days, we have event-based journalism. You're going to event, reporting. He said, she said, story. But you getting the consumer down there to understand what this story is about, you need to have grounding. But I really saw like Ngabi Imbo. So after my 6 months training, I was asked, Olivia, what do you want to do? When I got my business name, and I was like, Olivia, you have to be realistic with yourself. What are the things you love, and how can you do something different? And of course, you know, I've not talked about going to mentors, you know, asking them, da-da-da-da. Because at the end of the day, in one way or another, the media landscape has kind of like changed to showbiz. Yeah, reporting
Very.
the politics sometimes really irrelevant, but because, you know, like the showbiz thing is there and you
It's
need
the
to
big
trend
name
and you need the
around.
numbers at the end of the day, because media is a very expensive business. It is not charity. So sometimes you'll even call someone to report a story. Ekwata ku muntu nungi naye nga bwe batevaamu ssente ekiba tekivaayo.
Baga eyo teyita.
Hey, mathematics abatabona.
Eyo teyita.
So I had to really be realistic with myself. Now, I sit down and I'm like, Olivia, after getting information from my mentors, I was like, Olivia, what is it that you're passionate about? What is it that you can do? I was like, but I'm passionate about animals. I'm passionate about travel. I'm passionate about the environment. I love to protect the environment. I cannot have probably like a bedroom and I don't have a living thing in the name of a plant near me. So when I made my research in the newsroom, we had a segment called Taso Butonde, but it was more commercial actually than
These other.
we didn't have, like the stories would be channeled out when funding comes in for them. But then contract wegwe ya funding, nga everything, you know, goes back to like normal. At the time I also entered the newsroom, a colleague of mine was reporting about tourism, but we kind of like still had the same
travel show?
issues. No, we had a segment in the news called Around and Beyond. Around and Beyond. So it means you literally have to cover something inside Uganda and outside, provided
Uganda.
it is tourism travel. However, he had his issues, you know, because news has certain parameters that you have to fulfill for it to be called news. And that is why not everyone that would do a travel show, not everyone that would do it and because the travel show is heavily entertainment. But remember, when you go back to journalism school, some of the core functions of journalism is to also entertain. So we don't downplay it. It's very important. But also when you get to the other, you know, cores of news, it has to be timely, accurate, factual. You have to do your research. You have to balance the story. You have to question hard. And mentally, like, my mind was boiling. So I woke up to my editor. I'm like, you know what? I want to do tourism and environment conservation. Now, remember the media house I was working for at the time is heavily political.
Politics.
So it means you as a journalist, you have to be very creative to make sure that you prove to them that
this
what you
story
want
is
to
worthy.
do. Already Twaina desks ngazili established, you know, at Next Media. Politics, of course, the station is almost like 95% or 90% politics. You have the health desk, which shone in COVID. You have COVID-19 updates. But of course, also what kind of like made me angry. Okay, not really angry, but it was just a point of concern that I'd expect that the health reporter that has grounding in that to be the one to give us these statistics, but it was still someone reporting politics to be able to give us.
You the statistics.
And that is why one time we had the numbers issue. But, you know, that aside. So we had politics, we had health.
Business.
Business, yes. We had business. It was thriving. It was good. And now you have these mega... really, entertainment was not really in the newsroom. It was in another department. But we still have so many desks that are not catered to. For example, like tourism, government environment conservation, you know, was coming in. When the money comes in, ngati esente wezigwa kwa contract ngachiwede kwa partners nga sente za ziwedeyo nga, you know, it kind of like
boom.
So I saw a gap there. And remember, my mentors had told me, Olivia, again, the wall of a gap. Don't go and compete. I also want to stand on that, because I also see that with interns that have usually come in or usually came in, because interns are seeing these people like politics. But do you have grounding there? Is it what you want? Is it going to make you unique? Is it going to make you different? all of those things have to be put into consideration.
All right. And with that, I would like right there is where we're going to come back.
Okay.
You know?
Yes.
We're going to take a short break, a water break. Olivia needs to take some water because
I know, right?
we are just getting started.
You
get? Yeah, we're just getting started. And yes, we will be back. This is Destination 256. Keep it locked. And welcome back from that water break. It's not a short break. We've had a lot in between there. Yeah, and welcome back from that break, and thank you for joining us. And for that person who is just joining us, we are discussing tourism and the media sector. How are the two are joining, or how is the one that is supposed to push the other doing its work? Is it doing it the right way? Are we missing on some things? And do we need to iron out a few things here and there? You know, yes, who is involved, and how are we as young people changing the narrative? Because
surely
this world is us, this country is us. If we don't push it, no one is going to help us push it.
Yep.
And we are with Olivia Nakalembe, conservation journalist, veteran, Nabagambi. Watabu ali solid.
Zalo kamantu budi veteran bagenda kunzi bagenda kuntega mukocho kanga chimanyi bulungi ba journalists tebabe understand.
Ate veteran
bamutega information
tebamutega mukubo. But yes, and yes, Olivia, as we were going for a break, you were at that point.
Yeah.
Showing
the missing link.
The missing link.
So what I was trying to say was that it all begins back, the technicalities, just like I said earlier, the inspiration could be got anywhere. However, the technicalities stem from journalism school. So I've gotten you from journalism school, and now I have taken you to the newsroom. Remember, the newsrooms are receiving journalists that have not been trained on what exactly the tourism...
They're fresh from theories.
Thank you so much. They're fresh from theory, but remember also, we said earlier that the docket of tourism has not been catered for
in the theory,
or has not been catered to in journalism school. Most journalism schools, or the contemporary journalism schools that we have in the country, do not have an elective considering tourism. I was recently actually at Makerere University where the MICE experts were talking to tourism students.
Rick Taylor and Charlotte.
Can I tell you something? We went to, I think it's the School of Forestry.
That's where you met?
That's where tourism folds.
Wow.
I looked around the room. I didn't see anyone from CHUS, like College of Humanities and Social Sciences. But the good news was they're planning on creating a separate tourism department. But my other question was, where are the journalism students from CHUS
coming
in? Because at the end of the day, just like I told you earlier, media houses would rather cut the cost of training you a journalist that has zero information about tourism. Bagende n'abantu already abamanyi political science, reporting political stories. Media houses are already not paying the experts they have. The editors are complaining, akasente katono. The chief editors are complaining, akasente katono. The producers are complaining. But remember, these are already experts. Kati orogwataina any information about tourism. You want them to train you from ground zero. So if they can eliminate that cost, if they can eliminate that operational cost, the better. So I was giving you my personal experience. So I get into the newsroom where environment conservation that I wanted to passionately report about, where tourism that I wanted to passionately report about, is only highlighted at a point where a partner has come in to sponsor something. I know which campaign agala eliminating plastics, agala creating awareness about plastics.
About kuba CSR in channels of that.
Yeah. What duration is it? 1 year. Okay. Tukole campaign chaffe, tufuneyo journalist at reporting it about.
Achivuge.
After the 1 year, the desk goes
silent.
So the element of sustainability comes in vividly. So when I talked to my mentors and I realized that gap, I was like, okay, let's go. Initially, it was hard because I had to do a lot of research. Okwate ekitabo, ogende ku department of tourism, ogende ku MOBS, they have a tourism department. Befriend the lecturers, let them walk you through what tourism is, what it is, where it came from, SMART 19 what, Churchill came, what was it then, what was selling Uganda then. You understand the concept of tourism. Now, that was not the company's initiative. It was not the media house's initiative.
It was your personal initiative.
Olivia, you said you want to do what? To cover tourism? Kali tandika.
Fetwagala story.
It's upon you. I didn't get any money from them. I just sat down and I'm like, how am I going to do this? Nengenda. I befriended Mr. Kawere, was at MOBS. I befriended Dr. Katongole, he's now the head of the department at MOBS. I befriended Dr. I think it is Tumwebaze at Mackay University. Just getting to try and understand what is tourism. After understanding what tourism is, now you narrow it down. You first of all understand it on a global scale, then you narrow it down to Uganda's case so that you're able to tailor stories that your country people will understand before you actually get to report stories that maybe the BBC or CNN will pick on. It was tough. But along the way, it was made a bit easier because in that newsroom, because you know the perception of tourism that even our editors have, they're just chilling, they're just summiting the resort, they are dancing because we want it to be these ones are just chilling. So if a story came in there's a malaria outbreak, of course if resources are being allocated, they would rather give them to a health reporter because already bamanyi malaria chechi. But you're trying to bring in a new concept in the newsroom, that is tourism.
They don't want to understand the lion population. It's
zitugasachi. And for us, some of us, that's why we thank the COVID-19 pandemic. I will tell you why. It was an eye-opener. Nti eggwanga we lyasirika mwali muzaako ki. Now that is when the jinx is broken. That is when the tourism jinx is broken. But wait, there is this industry
that is still untapped.
So back in the newsroom, it was very hard for me. But what made it easier was this one editor of mine that I had. He is called Tiaba Abubeka. He was a scholar of environment, tourism. So remember I told you, usually these people that do over forestry or bichi, along the way, even in their internship, they intercept tourists because so in one way or the other, you find the two intertwining. Now this guy had reported about this sector before. Na yali atude ku desk nga waku editingila a political story ogamba.
Wow.
Just wait. But when they assigned me that and I went to him, nakwata contact list yonna gyali ayina najinjira. He gave me everything I needed. Now it was up to me to turn whatever he had given me into something tangible. That for me, that is what helped me. But remember, we already had someone who was reporting about, someone who would send in stories about
tourism.
But he was not doing it the news way.
He was doing
he would,
it
for
the
example,
show
like
way.
go, he would go, because there's a difference between like entertainment production
and news.
However, there are certain principles that cut across. It has to be factual, it has to be accurate, it has to be timely, it has to fulfill the 4 W's and the H. It has to tick the boxes for a news component. It was 5 minutes. So in other words, it was a feature. Now, if you've been given that time and you want to shine, you're doing something unique, something different, it means you have no excuse. But the other problem I got was that even during my pitching, because some of the editors do not understand, and you can't blame them. Already the media house has dictated
it has a philosophy,
politics.
A house philosophy, which is
tourism.
Yeah.
You're going to clash. You understand where they're coming from because they have deliverables. Tagenda kwemolera kugwe, you understand? So by the end of the day, I had to transform all that into something tangible. But you know why I was appreciating COVID-19? When now government also continues blowing the trumpet that, guys, try to do one nae. Ekintu kyokka right now kyetuse okufunamu sente. Tourism. Kati abantu amaaso ne gabagula. Because everyone wanted money, everyone wanted survival, everyone wanted... Now, they got to discover the gold that this sector has. But also, if you look around Uganda's media landscape, how many television stations do we have in the country? How many radio stations do we have in the country? We're not talking about traditional media.
No.
We have not yet even gone into new media. How many television stations also okay, they have time dedicated to tourism. If you want to know if our media landscape really understands tourism,
first count those.
Yeah, so
for me, I know 3.
Nainga tuina TV maker mugwanga. Going pa UCC
they are uncountable.
radio tuina maker.
Nyingi.
Maker zilinayo ka hour oba ka minute oba ka chi aka tourism. Ngochimanyi
manyemo kuba news if there is an activity of tourism. I think that person also, she's from Tebe, the other side of...
So that is where we are, Zal. A lot has changed. Because, for example, just like you said, tetwa ina media houses in Tinga zidinagu. Because if you look at the Amoti India Kiras at that time, but also if you look at the time dedicated to my tourism story, Ogenda, first of all, you're going to spend an entire day traveling. Now, you as a tourism journalist, you've spent an entire day traveling, but your friends have channeled out like 2-3 stories. There's a politics. Bagenze ku nupu bechanza, bagenze ku NRM, sima baziza gulyo mchere gwe balwanira, bagenze ku DP, mawa afulumye. Your friends have cut by 3 stories. The press conference, mubera bwa sawa beach.
Obadde ku kubo ogenda machizoni.
Gwokyali mu kubo ogenda maction. Kati editor wa kibalamu gagamba naye tuli ku kiwano bano bazannya katemba. Then you're going to because for you to tailor a complete tourism story, you need resources. How many media houses can channel these resources out? In the very end, you have to establish strategic partners like UWA, YouTube. Zina kubera wano ku fingertips. So kwate simu nokubira idi wa UWA. Can you get the phone and call the Minister of Tourism and tell them can you call Mr. Msinguzi at UWEC and tell him we need this? Can you call Mr. Kaure at UHTTI and tell him we want your students to curate for us a hospitality experience? Story tujye covering bulungi tujye tailoring ku one of you get. Can you call Mr. Baluku in Kasese at UHTTI and tell him we want those students to do this and this and this? It takes time. Kati saa meka zogenda kumara ogende Kasese. Ate sente meka. How a media house is willing to foot that bill? That's why I'm saying you have to have those key partners on board. You have to for one story.
For one story.
Ono bamuwadde that liter nagenda ku 3 press conferences. Mathematics abata math. So those are some of the things that we need to first deal with from school. We've talked about the school, but also what the media houses suck in from school to fill the capacity building gap. But then also constant training and retraining, because tourism right now keeps evolving. That's why we have product development. We used to treasure wildlife. They right now, statistics if UNESCO is giving us a report saying countries that shall have invested in culture will be earning about $10 trillion in the next 10 years. Chitegeza to stepping not really step away, but we now have to also capitalize on culture. We're government right now
beyond the tourism trap. The same conversation.
That's why this podcast is very timely. So those are some of the things we need to address. But also, do journalists have the complete understanding at the end of the day about the sector? But also
besides those we know, the Juliuses, the Yus, the Chisekas.
Now, we are now away from the media house. Now let's go to the public. Those are already three components we've talked about, that we are going to talk about. The public. Does this public understand what tourism is? Omuntu abeera Entebbe, yabamuzaalidde Entebbe, n'akulira Entebbe, n'asomera Entebbe, n'afumbirwa Entebbe, n'azaala abaana Entebbe, nga tagendangako ku zoo. Kyokka nga those days it was 5K for over adults to enter. But of course, because the shilling has, omuntu tagendangako ku zoo. They don't have the understanding, they don't have the appreciation. Who is supposed to fill that gap? Even the general public who are reporting it at this news, do they understand what tourism is? So ogenda okulaba ebintu byonna media weesobola okukolera obulungi nga byonna it's falling on infertile ground. Omuntu omugamba nedda omanyi kati if you want to live long gendako mu bwindi so that you breathe in that air that is fresh. Ezo sente zange so zinywamu wali muku mindset, the mindset also of the publics that we disseminate this information towards the journalists, but also from the public. How many parents would send their children to school to pursue journalism? Okay, let's say 10 years back, because now COVID let's say back then.
When I was pursuing journalism, my mom was like, "Ogenze bakube emigo." So everyone is like,
it was more of like the uptown parents that would be like, yeah, she will be well traveled, she will network, she'll get to know. But they wanted the core professionals, doctor, small lawyer, small bichi.
Yanga family wefunayo lawyer. Ya manyi kuchalo. Mwana wa gundi lawyer. So
wakoze misango jona chimwagala because mumai muinayo chi.
Lawyer.
Nekati tourist, omuntu akola mu hotel, omuntu akola mu national park.
Atuyambe ki?
Atuyamba ki? Tugenda nyumya ki?
Ewo kitegeera nti ensolo zakoze ki? Oba kati abantu baagala biki mu park?
But that as well, let's go to, because I asked you the question, who is supposed to fill that mindset gap? We have institutions that are solely or primarily responsible. I'll say primarily, not solely, because even the private sector, it's their role to make sure that they... But we have now government that is supposed to primarily interest the general public with this information. They're supposed to create awareness. They're supposed to, have they played their role?
On that very moment.
Why is it that from the time Churchill wrote this book up to now, how many years down the road, omuntu tannaba kutegeera concept ya tourism cheki?
People only know the quote and the last word, Uganda is truly the pearl of Africa.
Because now those are some of the things that, for example, policies like the marketing strategy that is fed into the UTB
the
Act.
National...
Because the UTB Act houses the National Marketing Strategy. Because the national strategy, the national marketing strategy is supposed to have components like awareness creation so that someone gets to, the consumer of the tourism product gets to understand.
Someone got me with Explore Uganda bottle. Nagamba, tuwa company yonge ili nakagundi akalunji. Gwe kalunji. Kati okolo, you get, not once.
Not
I
twice.
was in different expos around, in Kampala here. And we were displaying merchandise. And it's like, so kati no tuwa company ekolachi? I was like, wow.
Because now that is still where media again has to come in.
And that
but media has to come in ng'ekintu chili laid out nti tulina strategy twagala okugobera nti awareness creation. How do you create awareness? Digital platforms, you go to radio, you go to print, you go to TV, you go to
outdoors, Kati awo wennyini wenzijira nembuuza, are these government, do we call them parastatals or what? Agencies laid that
Maybe like
ground.
ministries, departments,
Yes,
and agencies.
laid that ground for the journalists, the content creators, and made it easy for you guys to, knock those doors and say, okay, you guys, I want to do ABC. I want to write this story about ABC. I want to create this, journey experience, content video. And this is what I need. Have they made it possible?
If you were to ask me that question dating way back, like say 10 years, I would say no. But currently, I would say they're trying.
But to the people they know.
I think to the people that ask also, because another thing, just like I told you, I did my own research to get to understand how the sector works. The ministry didn't come to me. The newsroom didn't come to me. I went there. I wanted the news. I saw a need. I felt I could serve my country best in that way. If you talk to conservation journalists that came before us, like Tenywa,
Gerard.
they will tell you, you people, we see you there chilling with the minister. Are you serious? You guys are chilling with the minister. Those guys used not to chill with us. That's not how it was. Minister ngabera what. Amulabireri. Kufuna appointment.
State minister
State minister abanonya no banonya.
Tabalabyewo.
Akube simu nagamba okitegeera. So things have kind of changed. Because just like I said, if you talk to Tenyo, the story is different. But these days, they are trying. But still a lot needs to be done. For example, we've constantly done stories about the lack of a marketing strategy. And now I can tell you that one, the UTB Act is under amendment. Because we've constantly asked the real questions. The UTB Act is under amendment. Now, of course, it factors in things like the marketing strategy. They're also working on the marketing strategy.
Yeah, they are.
It should be out anytime soon. We've queried laws that have been outdated for years. For example, the monuments and
museums.
Yeah, the Museums and Monuments Act, because it was a bill like by last year, but then it was passed last year. Good news, But just like I said, a lot needs to be done. TAINA guidelines is affecting us, so we have a beautiful law, but it's seated in the shelves. However, they promised us that the guidelines that are supposed to effect these policies, bali mubikolako. Yeah, but we also have now, kati atuvuddewo tugende mu legislators. When usually they present the budget, because they've not had these stories from media, as the journalists, tebamanyi nabo kyakola kyova olabira budget ya tourism wejja bawoganamu. This is a lot of money, but they've not factored in nti eno sector is the country's cash cow. Silage or hay Georgiwa is very beautiful, eina supplements, eina. Now, even the legislators, they don't have that information. Let's look at the composition for the tourism trade committee of parliament. How many of those members of parliament have grounding in tourism? But if I could mention names, we shall die. I think usually the one that I talk to is Honorable Karim Masaba. Gosobola okujjako interview ngegumidde.
Because he's from the other side and has pushed so much the Mbale side.
But the rest? Let's look at the environment conservation, where even wildlife, would factor in. If you on that committee, for me, in my opinion, the most vocal MP there is the Honorable Kaya Christine.
I always ask one last question.
Yeah.
And this is the last question. Now, in the side of media and tourism, if you could name 5 people that have done work in this, putting together our sector up there in the media, okay, you can mix both in media and the other side.
I think for me, I would want to, first of all, appreciate the journalists that came before us, but also still there. For example, if you're talking about Uganda's conservation space, one of the journalists I've interacted with in that regard is most definitely Gerald Tenure.
Yeah.
Most of these
Gerald Tenure has
NGOs
been
like
there.
that are probably like 10 years, 20 years. They know Gerald because I mean he's a forestry student. So he definitely had the grounding. And you can name forestry tebasomesa journalism. So he also had to interest himself with journalism. Okusobola to report accurately, whatever.
Number 2.
That is on the bit of conservation. Oh God, I've read so much work. I'm even forgetting the names. On the side of tourism, I think one of the first tourism reporters that we had was Mr. Stephen Asimwe. And yet he was reporting about tourism in the business sense.
Stephen Asimwe.
Yes, the CEO of
the
PSFU. Yes, many people don't know that he was a journalist, but he was one of the first tourism journalists that we had in this
People
country.
have named him, so far now you're the third.
Lord, I've not been in this industry, in the media industry, in tourism for 10 years.
Those people you've seen, really.
Those are 2. Wangambye 5, right?
5. Njagala bataano bokka.
In the media. If we are to go back to conservation, because just like I said, conservation and,
And tourism.
I feel like Draku has also done us justice when he gets an environment conservation story. These are people whose lives have been threatened because, for example, the reason as to why Kampala no longer has like beautiful birds. Okay, not that it no longer has, but like the numbers have really dwindled, is because there's been a lot of swamp reclamation. Katotunu abantunga Draku that have even like risked their lives, even Tenywa. One time I went to some island and we found him there. And we thought he was chilling. Yes, he was chilling, but he was hiding because he had just written a story about a city tycoon who built in a swamp. Ngabamunonya. So Draku, 4. I think, is also good.
Yeah.
Lord.
Gattamu abo abato abazzenga.
I think I would also give credit to one of my former editors, that is Tiaba Abubeka. He wrote very good award-winning stories, even with Acme. He got international recognition, and he worked with Tenyo as well. And he also mentored me in this sector. I mean, the fact that he's also an ecotourism student, I think he's done commendable work, but also in igniting and lighting a candle in for the upcoming generation, because I'm sure I would not be here if it was not for him. Those are 4, right?
Number 1 to Chigale tugende.
Number 1.
Number 5.
Number 1. There's no woman there. I think maybe the women, we had them, but they were just not. I think I'd love to give credit to myself as well. Because I've looked through my list and there's no women, but yet we have women. So let me give credit to myself. In no particular, but your list in no particular order, but I'll give credit to myself. I've not really done a lot. I've not even spent a decade.
But you're promising to do.
But I tried to utilize the platform I had. I've tried to utilize the platform I've had to really shine a light on some of the tourism issues. They might not have been exhaustive. For example, some of the stories to report about tourism are very, very dangerous. I mean, you're having traders in... one time there's a story that pointed to a very powerful individual in this country that was... they were, fingering snakes outside the country. Trafficking. You have people that are being cited in rackets that are in China, in what, like, and they're taking, for example, like elephant, ivory elephant tusks out of the country, bushmeat. These are not light stories. But remember, when you like say shoot an elephant dead, tourism ebefa, nature ebefa.
The ecosystem is.
And there are some of those stories that are dangerous, very, very, very dangerous to investigate such a story before it's busted. It's very dangerous.
All right.
So let's go with those fives, guys. Yes,
That's a wrap for today's episode. For Destination 256. Thank you for joining us as Olivia Nakalembe was taking us through her journey to the tourism sector and also trying to describe the media landscape and tourism through her perspective. This is UG in Conversation. And yes, keep it locked for the next episode. Bye-bye.